"I want to see if you're capable," shouted the millionaire dean as he challenged a simple pregnant janitor in front of the entire university. The prize? 3 million reais if she could solve an equation that had humiliated even the best students. But he didn't expect that woman to be the brilliant former student the system had erased. Nor that, in just a few minutes, she would destroy the myth of meritocracy with a single answer. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing. The broom glided across the marble floor of the imposing auditorium at the Commonwealth University of New Haven. With circular and precise movements, Felicity Reed removed the last traces of the previous night's awards ceremony. Her back ached, and the baby in her womb stirred restlessly, as if protesting against the excessive effort its mother was making in her 7th month of pregnancy. As she cleaned, Felicity observed the details of the place: the podium where illustrious professors delivered speeches, the chairs where promising students sat, the space that had once been hers. 5 years ago she wasn't wielding a broom, but a white lab coat with her name embroidered on it. Dr. Felicity Reed, or at least that's what she should have been called. "Ms. Reed, are you finished here?" asked George, the cleaning team supervisor. "The dean will be using the auditorium shortly for the inauguration ceremony of the new Advanced Research Laboratory." "I'm almost done, George. Just 5 more minutes," she replied, adjusting her light blue uniform which barely accommodated her belly. George nodded and walked away. He was a simple but kind man, one of the few who treated her with some dignity in that place. The rest of the academic community barely noticed her existence. To them, Felicity was just another outsourced employee, invisible like the stains she removed daily. What no one imagined was that those same hands that now held cleaning products had once manipulated surgical instruments with incredible precision, written scientific articles published in international journals, and developed promising research on less invasive treatments for pediatric tumors. Felicity closed her eyes for an instant and allowed herself to remember the feeling of the first day of college, the emotion of receiving a full scholarship for academic merit, the praise from professors, the awards, the sleepless nights studying, the dream getting closer every day of becoming a brilliant doctor who would honor the memory of her mother, Clara. Clara, who had worked as a domestic helper her entire life so her daughter could study, who died of a treatable disease, but which was not diagnosed in time because doctors at the health clinic did not give proper attention to a poor and uneducated woman. "I'm going to change that, Mum," Felicity had promised by the hospital bed. "No one else will be treated as invisible." Ironic how life came full circle. Now it was she who had become invisible. Everything fell apart when she discovered her unplanned pregnancy, the result of a relationship with Matthew, an engineering student. At the time, Felicity was in her final year of college, with 3 published articles and about to present her final thesis. The pregnancy came with serious complications that forced her to stay on bed rest for 2 months. "We need to cancel your scholarship, Ms. Reed," announced Dr. Richard Montgomery, the university's dean, on that fateful day. "Your prolonged absence demonstrates a lack of commitment to the institution and to your own academic future." "But, Doctor, I have complications with my pregnancy." "I have all the medical certificates. It's a health matter," she argued, holding back tears. The dean adjusted his gold-framed glasses and smiled disdainfully. "Medicine demands sacrifices, young lady. If you are not willing to make them, perhaps you have chosen the wrong profession. Your scholarship will be transferred to a student who truly values the opportunity." Without the scholarship, Felicity could not continue. The costs were prohibitive for someone of her social standing. Matthew, frightened by the responsibility, disappeared from her life upon learning of the complications. Without money, without family support, and with a baby on the way, Felicity had to abandon the dream she had fought for years. The final irony came 6 months later, when, desperate for any job that would pay the bills, she saw an opening for a cleaning assistant at the very university that had expelled her. Desperation spoke louder than pride. A sound of footsteps in the corridor brought Felicity back to the present. She quickly resumed cleaning, knowing that any distraction could cost her her job. Voices approached the auditorium. Felicity immediately recognized the authoritative tone of Dr. Richard Montgomery, now accompanied by a group of men in suits. "And here is the main auditorium where we will hold the ceremony," the dean said. "We have just renovated it with the generous donation from the Worthington Foundation." "Impressive, Richard," replied a grey-haired man in an impeccable suit. "The foundation has always known how to invest in institutions of excellence like this one." Felicity kept her head down, continuing her work as the men entered. But the baby chose that moment to give a particularly strong kick, causing her to let out a small involuntary groan. The dean looked in her direction with irritation. "Haven't you finished cleaning yet? The ceremony starts in an hour." "Sorry, Doctor. I'm finishing up," Felicity replied without looking up. "These outsourced companies," Montgomery grumbled to his guests, "it's getting harder and harder to find quality service." The grey-haired man, however, looked at Felicity with curiosity. "This employee is pregnant," he observed. "Quite far along from what I see. She should be in a less strenuous role." The dean seemed slightly embarrassed. "Well, Charles, unfortunately, we cannot control the human resources policies of the contracted companies." Charles Worthington, the billionaire philanthropist whose name adorned hospitals and research institutes across the country, approached Felicity. "How do you feel, my dear? How many months?" Felicity finally raised her face, surprised by the genuine interest. 7 months, sir." Something in her gaze made Worthington frown, as if trying to remember something. "Your face is familiar to me. Have you worked at any other institution I've visited?" Before Felicity could answer, the dean intervened. "Charles, the students are waiting to present the new laboratory's projects. We have a tight schedule." Worthington nodded, but before walking away, he said to Felicity, "Good luck with your baby." Felicity murmured her thanks and returned to work, but an idea began to form in her mind. Worthington was known for his interest in social and educational projects. Perhaps, in the room adjacent to the auditorium, prepared to receive guests after the ceremony, Felicity was cleaning the tables when she heard excited voices. "Impossible. This equation is beyond the comprehension of most of our best students," said a medical physics professor. "It's a specific application of magnetic resonance to detect minuscule cellular changes. It would take months for an average student to understand all the parameters involved." "That's precisely why it's perfect for the scholarship competition," the dean replied. "We only want the truly exceptional. Meritocracy cannot have a middle ground, Professor." Felicity froze. That was her area of specialization before she dropped out of the program. For years, even while working as a cleaner, she had continued, studying in secret, using the university library during times she could go unnoticed. She approached discreetly and saw the equation on the whiteboard. It was complex but familiar, involving principles she had not only studied but perfected in her interrupted research. At that moment, like a flash, Felicity saw an opportunity, a chance to regain her dignity, to prove her worth, an unexpected possibility to turn the tables. And the baby, as if sensing its mother's sudden racing heart, gave a kick of approval. The Professor Alistair Taylor Grand Auditorium was completely packed. Professors, students, and distinguished guests occupied every available seat for the inauguration ceremony of the Advanced Medical Research Laboratory. On stage, chairs were arranged for the authorities, with Dean Dr. Richard Montgomery at the center, flanked by Charles Worthington and other members of the University Council. Felicity pushed her cleaning cart through the side corridors, collecting small debris left by the guests. It wasn't her job to be there during the event, but she had asked George to stay. "I need the overtime," she justified. In reality, she wanted a closer look at that equation that hadn't left her mind since the previous afternoon. "And now," the dean announced into the microphone, "I have the pleasure of presenting an unprecedented initiative in our academic excellence program. The Worthington Foundation will offer a special research development scholarship of £3 million to the student who solves a specific challenge." A murmur of excitement rippled through the auditorium. $3 million was an unprecedented amount for an individual research scholarship. "The challenge is this," Montgomery continued, as an assistant revealed a whiteboard with a complex mathematical equation. Developed by our medical physics department, this equation represents a magnetic resonance problem applied to the early diagnosis of cellular changes. Our best postgraduate students have been poring over it for weeks without success. Felicity watched from afar, her heart racing. It was the same equation she had seen the day before, and she had thought about it all night. In fact, the solution was already practically formulated in her mind. "Would any volunteer from the audience like to try?" the dean asked with a condescending smile, clearly not expecting anyone to accept the challenge. Silence. The students exchanged glances, intimidated by the complexity of the problem. "No one," Montgomery insisted. "Well, it's no surprise. As I said, it's an extremely complex problem that I would like to try." The firm voice cut off the dean's speech. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. Felicity had stepped forward, still in her cleaning uniform, with her hands resting on her pregnant belly. An astonished silence fell over the auditorium, followed by suppressed giggles. The dean's face wavered between surprise and irritation. "Pardon me, but this is an academic challenge," he said, adjusting the microphone, "aimed at qualified students and researchers." "You announced that anyone in the audience could try," Felicity replied, keeping her voice calm. "I am in the audience." Charles Worthington leaned forward, observing the scene with interest. "Let her try, Richard," the billionaire said, loud enough to be heard. "It will be interesting." The dean hesitated, visibly uncomfortable, but faced with the insistence of his biggest sponsor, he forced a smile. "Very well." He gestured for Felicity to come onto the stage. "What is your name?" "Felicity Reed," she replied, climbing the steps with some difficulty due to her advanced pregnancy. Upon hearing the name, one of the older professors in the front row adjusted his glasses, observing her more closely. "Well, Ms. Reed," Montgomery said, emphasizing the form of address he normally used, only for general service employees, never for academic colleagues. "You will have 20 minutes to solve the problem. Are you sure you wish to go through this?" "Embarrassment?" Felicity kept her gaze firm. "Absolutely." The dean extended a pen to her with a sneer. "Then the stage is yours." He turned to the audience and added ironically, "Who knows, we might discover a hidden talent among our support staff." Suppressed laughter echoed through the auditorium. Felicity ignored them, approaching the whiteboard. Her son stirred within her, as if protesting against the public humiliation his mother was facing. She gently caressed her belly as if saying, "Don't worry, my love. Mommy knows what she's doing." She studied the equation for a few moments, recognizing each variable, each constant, each proposed relationship. It was truly complex, but there was an elegance to it that Felicity appreciated. The specific problem involved detecting microscopic cellular changes through magnetic resonance, using principles of quantum physics to increase diagnostic precision. The auditorium watched in silence as Felicity began to write. Her strokes were precise, her handwriting clear and academic, very different from what would be expected of someone without scientific training. She worked methodically, unhurriedly, but efficiently. Gradually, the mocking silence was replaced by an astonished silence. The laughter ceased. The medical physics professors leaned forward, following each step of her reasoning with increasing amazement. Felicity didn't just solve the equation, she improved it. She added variables that made the model more precise, eliminated redundancies, simplified complex expressions without losing accuracy. It was evident to anyone with a scientific background that this was not luck or chance. It was absolute mastery of the subject. After 17 minutes, Felicity placed the pen on the whiteboard tray and stepped back. She had not only solved the proposed problem, but added a brief explanation of how her solution could be applied to increase the sensitivity of current magnetic resonance imaging machines by 30%. "I believe it is correct," she said simply, "and if implemented, it can reduce the cost of examinations by approximately 40%, making them more accessible to the public health system." The silence was absolute. Dean Montgomery looked at the whiteboard, then at Felicity, completely speechless. The medical physics professors whispered among themselves, frantically checking each step of the solution on their tablets and phones. Finally, the oldest professor in the front row stood up. It was Dr. Julian Rivers, head of the medical physics department, an internationally respected scientist. "The solution is correct," he announced, his voice slightly trembling. "And the proposed optimizations are brilliant, absolutely brilliant." A growing murmur spread through the auditorium. Charles Worthington was smiling openly now, observing the entire scene with evident satisfaction. Dean Montgomery tried to maintain his composure, but his face was pale. "Well, this is unexpected," he stammered. "Obviously, we'll need to calmly verify everything before—" "There's nothing to verify, Richard," Dr. Julian interrupted. "Anyone with adequate training can see that the solution is correct, and the proposed improvements are revolutionary." Charles Worthington stood up and approached Felicity. "Congratulations, Ms. Reed, your demonstration was extraordinary." "Thank you." "Mr. Worthington," Felicity replied, "I believe you have just won a £3 million scholarship," the billionaire continued. "Unless our dean has any objection." All eyes turned to Montgomery, who swallowed hard. "Naturally, we need to follow institutional protocols," he tried. "The candidate needs to be a regularly enrolled student and—" "I am not a student," Felicity interrupted, her voice now stronger. "But I was. At this very university." The murmur in the auditorium grew. Professor Julian stepped forward, observing her more attentively. "My goodness," he murmured. "Felicity Reed, now I remember. You were one of our best medical students. You published that brilliant article on non-invasive imaging diagnostic techniques." "Yes, Professor," she confirmed. "Before losing my scholarship for lack of commitment, when I had pregnancy complications and needed medical leave." The auditorium erupted in murmurs. Charles Worthington now looked at the dean with an inscrutable expression. "Richard, are you aware of this?" he asked. The dean adjusted his tie, visibly uncomfortable. "It's a complex case, Charles. There were administrative issues and—" "It wasn't complex," Felicity cut in. "It was unjust. And it wasn't the only case. During the 3 years I've worked cleaning this university, I've observed systematic patterns of discrimination against low-income students, especially women and people of color." She paused, looking directly at the dean. "And I've observed much more than that." Her right hand slipped into her uniform pocket, from which she pulled a small USB device. "As a cleaning employee, I am invisible to most people in this institution. No one pays attention when I enter rooms during closed meetings. No one cares if I'm present when they discuss how to falsify research results to secure more funding. No one notices when I clean offices where compromising documents are open on tables." The dean's face was no longer just pale. It was livid. Charles Worthington took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe this ceremony has just taken an unexpected turn, but one potentially much more important than the simple inauguration of a laboratory." He turned to Felicity. "Ms. Reed, would you like to explain exactly what you have on that device and what you intend to do with it?" Felicity looked at the packed auditorium, at the surprised faces of the students, at the confused professors, at the panicking dean. "I intend justice," she replied simply. "Not just for myself, but for all those who have been silenced by a system that speaks of meritocracy while perpetuating privileges." A dense silence fell over the auditorium. The tension was palpable, like a rope stretched to its limit, about to snap. Felicity remained at the center of the stage, one hand holding the USB device, the other resting protectively on her belly. Her face showed a serenity that contrasted with the chaos of emotions the situation had provoked. Dean Montgomery was the first to break the silence, forcing a laugh that sounded false even to his most loyal supporters. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this incident." He stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation. "It seems we have a former student with some personal grievances. I suggest we continue our ceremony as planned and—" "These are not personal grievances, Dr. Montgomery," Felicity interrupted, her firm voice echoing through the auditorium. "These are concrete evidence of systematic irregularities, and I am not here to ruin your ceremony, but to reclaim what was unjustly taken from me." Charles Worthington, still on stage, observed everything with growing interest. "I believe everyone here deserves to hear what Ms. Reed has to say," he declared, to the dean's visible despair. "After all, if there are structural problems in an institution that receives millions in private donations and public funds, it is in everyone's interest that they be exposed and corrected." "Charles, "Please," Montgomery whispered, approaching the billionaire. "This is clearly an attempt at extortion or personal revenge. We can discuss any concerns in a more appropriate environment." Worthington observed the dean for a moment before responding. "You know what intrigues me most, Richard," he said in a calm tone but audible to everyone nearby, "is that I didn't even mention the possibility of serious irregularities. I only spoke of structural problems. Your immediate reaction makes me think that perhaps there is more truth in this woman's words than I initially supposed." The dean paled even further. If that were possible. Felicity took a step forward, looking directly at the audience. "I will be clear about what I have here." She raised the USB device. "For 3 years, while cleaning meeting rooms, laboratories, and offices, I collected evidence of various irregularities. Recordings of private meetings, where the automatic approval of students whose families make significant donations was openly discussed. Documents detailing how research results were manipulated to ensure continued funding. Emails exchanged between high-level administrators discussing how to use subjective criteria to eliminate low-income scholarship students who do not fit the institution's profile." Murmurs of indignation spread through the auditorium. Some professors exchanged worried glances, while students whispered among themselves, some with expressions of surprise, others nodding in recognition as if confirming long-held suspicions. "This is absurd," exclaimed the dean, finally losing his composure. "You are accusing one of the most respected higher education institutions in the country of unethical and possibly illegal conduct." "This is defamation." "These are not accusations, Dr. Montgomery," Felicity replied calmly. "These are documented facts, and if you insist on calling this defamation, I will be pleased to hand over this evidence to the district attorney's office for them to decide." A young student in the third row stood up. "My name is Brian Oliver. I am a scholarship recipient from the Social Inclusion Program." His voice trembled slightly. "Last semester, my scholarship was cancelled for low academic performance, even though I had higher grades than several colleagues who remained in the program. The difference is that they come from influential families, and I am the son of a domestic helper, as you once were." Other students began to stand, sharing similar experiences. An Indigenous student recounted how she was advised against pursuing an academic career, despite her excellent grades. A student in a wheelchair told how his requests for laboratory adaptations were systematically denied due to budgetary infeasibility, while millions were spent on aesthetic renovations. Charles Worthington listened to everything with a grave expression, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. Beside him, the dean seemed to shrink with each new account. "Enough," Montgomery finally exclaimed. "This has turned into a circus. I will end this session immediately and—" "No, you won't," said a firm voice from the front row. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was Dr. Eleanor Campbell, Professor Emerita of Medical Ethics, recently retired after 3 decades dedicated to the university. "I worked here for 30 years, she continued, standing with the aid of a cane. "And for the last 10, I've sadly observed how this institution I helped build has increasingly strayed from its founding principles." She looked directly at Felicity. "I remember you, Felicity Reed, one of the brightest minds to ever pass through my classes. When I learned you had left the program, I asked why and was told it had been a personal choice. I never believed it." The professor turned to face the dean. "How many extraordinary talents have been wasted, Richard? How many brilliant minds have been driven away to maintain the status quo, to preserve the comfortable homogeneity of an elite that fears true diversity of thought?" The auditorium erupted in applause. The dean looked around, desperately seeking allies, but finding only hostile or, at the very least, suspicious expressions. Charles Worthington took the microphone again. "I believe we need to establish a formal procedure to investigate these allegations," he said. "As the primary sponsor of this institution, I demand absolute transparency." He turned to Felicity. "Ms. Reed, what are your specific demands?" Felicity took a deep breath. This was the moment she had waited for 3 years. "I have 4 demands," she declared. "First, the official revalidation of my degree, with formal recognition that I was unjustly penalized. Second, the creation of a professor-researcher position for me in the field of applied medical physics, where I can continue the work that was interrupted. Third, the creation of a permanent scholarship fund for students in vulnerable situations, with special attention to pregnant women and student mothers. And fourth, the creation of an inclusive research center dedicated to the memory of my mother, Clara Reed, who always believed in the transformative power of education. The dean tried one last card. This is clearly an attempt at blackmail. This woman is trying to extort the university with threats. These are not threats, Dr. Montgomery, Felicity retorted. It is a proposal for reparation. I could simply hand over this evidence to the authorities and the press. The damage to the university's reputation would be incalculable. Several careers would be destroyed, including yours. But that is not what I desire. I want transformation, not destruction. Dr. Eleanor approached the stage. What Felicity is proposing is not only fair to her, it is beneficial for the entire institution. A more inclusive scholarship program, an innovative research center, a brilliant mind returning to academic ranks. How can this be bad? Charles Worthington nodded. I fully agree. In fact, I'm willing to double the funding for the scholarship fund proposed by Ms. Reed, should the university accept her conditions. The dean now found himself cornered. He looked at the council members present, but many averted their gaze, clearly trying to dissociate themselves from him in the face of the imminent scandal. This needs to be discussed by the university council, he finally said. I cannot make decisions of this magnitude unilaterally. Understandable, Worthington agreed. I suggest an extraordinary council meeting tomorrow, with the presence of Ms. Reed and her legal representatives. Legal representatives? The dean repeated, dismayed. Oh, I forgot to mention, Felicity said with a small smile. Over the past 3 years, while working here as a cleaner, I completed a distance learning law degree. I can represent myself if necessary. New murmurs of admiration spread through the auditorium. The story of that woman who, even working in precarious conditions and pregnant, managed to graduate in another field while collecting evidence against the system that had oppressed her, began to acquire almost mythical contours. The dean, realizing he was completely losing control of the situation, made one last desperate attempt. This woman is invading institutional privacy. Clandestine recordings are illegal. I will immediately contact our legal counsel to prosecute. I wouldn't do that, Richard, Charles Worthington interrupted, his voice now icy. Unless you want to explain why last year, more than 40% of the research funded by my foundation did not produce the promised results, despite the extremely optimistic reports I received. I'm starting to suspect that there might be a more sordid explanation than simple scientific setbacks. The dean turned completely pale. Charles, drive to council meeting tomorrow 10 o'clock, Worthington decreed, without giving the dean a chance to complete his sentence. Miss Reed, I will consider it a personal pleasure to ensure that your demands are met. Your story and your persistence are inspiring. Felicity nodded, grateful. Thank you, Mr. Worthington, but I would like to make it clear that I am not seeking personal revenge. My goal is to correct systemic injustices that affect many beyond myself. She turned to the audience. For 3 years, I observed. I listened. I documented. I saw brilliant students being discarded for not having the right connections. I saw committed researchers being pressured to falsify results to secure funding. I saw true meritocracy being suffocated by entrenched privileges. Her voice trembled slightly, but she composed herself. I also saw courage. I saw professors who risked their positions to defend wronged students. I saw staff members who gave up personal benefits to help struggling students. I saw small acts of resistance that kept alive the flame of what this university should be. She gently caressed her belly. It is for them, and for the future my son deserves, that I am here today. The auditorium erupted in deafening applause. Students, professors, and even some council members stood up, cheering for that pregnant woman, dressed in a simple cleaning uniform, who had just shaken the foundations of one of the country's most powerful institutions. In the midst of the commotion, no one noticed when Dean Montgomery discreetly left the stage through a side door, his face contorted in a mixture of anger and fear. In his mind, desperate plans were already forming to contain a situation that threatened to destroy everything he had built. The meeting room in Felicity's apartment, barely accommodated the 5 people present. It was a simple place, in a modest neighborhood in New Haven, furnished with basic pieces and some bookshelves filled with books, the only luxury items she allowed herself. On the small dining table, transformed into a strategy table, documents, computers, and half-empty coffee cups were scattered. "The dean won't give up easily," said Anna Louise, a young lawyer who had offered to help Felicity as soon as she heard about the case. "I just received information that he called an emergency meeting with the university's main supporters last night." Felicity nodded, massaging her aching back from the weight of her advanced pregnancy. It was expected. Montgomery had built a powerful network over the years. He wouldn't simply accept defeat. Brian, the scholarship student who had spoken up in the auditorium, frantically checked social media on his laptop. "The defamation campaign has already begun," he informed. "Newly created profiles are sharing alleged revelations about your past, Felicity. They say you were expelled for plagiarism, that you invented the pregnancy to justify low grades, that you have a history of false accusations against professors." Felicity closed her eyes for a moment. She knew they would reach this point, but the speed and cruelty still surprised her. "We can counterattack with the truth," suggested Eleanor Campbell, the retired professor who was now one of her most fervent defenders. "I have access to your complete academic records. I can prove that you were always an exemplary student. And I can contact journalists I trust," added Peter Ellis, a journalism professor who completed the small group. "We have to control the narrative before Montgomery completely distorts it." Felicity stood up with difficulty and walked to the window. Outside, the city pulsed, indifferent to the drama unfolding in her small apartment. For a moment, she felt the weight of it all on her shoulders. Was it really worth it? The stress could affect her already complicated pregnancy. What if she lost her job before she could get another? What if the false accusations spread to the point where no one would want to hire her? As if reading her thoughts, Eleanor approached and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone, Felicity. And you can back down if you think it's best for you and your baby. No one here would think less of you for it." Felicity touched the professor's hand with gratitude. "Thank you, Eleanor. But I can't back down now. It's not just for me. It's for all the others who went through what I did and didn't have a chance to fight." She took a deep breath. "Besides, Montgomery won't stop just because I give up. He's already determined to destroy me." Anna Louise's phone rang, interrupting the conversation. She answered and spoke briefly, her face growing increasingly serious. "That was my contact in the university's legal department," she said after hanging up. "Montgomery has opened a formal investigation against you for theft of intellectual property and breach of confidentiality. He is alleging that you stole ongoing research during your work as a cleaner." Brian let out a curse word, which he immediately tried to disguise with a cough upon noticing Eleanor's disapproving look. "That's absurd," exclaimed Peter. "How can he accuse her of stealing something she herself developed?" "He can because he controls the institutional narrative," Felicity replied, returning to the table. "And because technically any research developed with university resources belongs to the institution." "But you were unjustly dismissed," Eleanor reminded. "Doesn't that invalidate the intellectual property agreement?" Anna Louise frowned, thoughtful. "Possibly, but it would be a long and expensive legal battle, and that's exactly what Montgomery wants, to drag out the case until Felicity no longer has the resources or energy to continue." "Furthermore," Peter added, "as long as the case is sub judice, the university has justification for not implementing any of the demands made by Felicity." A heavy silence fell over the group. The plan that had seemed so promising after the public confrontation began to show its fragilities in the face of the institutional power they were up against. Felicity's cell phone vibrated with a message. She picked it up, read it quickly, and her face paled. "What is it?" Eleanor asked, worried. "George, my supervisor." Felicity's voice trembled slightly. "I've just been suspended pending investigation for inappropriate workplace conduct." "They can't do that." Brian protested. "It's clearly retaliation." "Yes, they can," Anna Louise replied, her face grim. "Technically, Felicity broke confidentiality rules by recording meetings without authorization. They are using the law to their advantage. So we're on the defensive now," Peter concluded. Felicity sat down again, feeling an uncomfortable twinge in her back. The stress was starting to affect her body. "We need a new strategy," she said, trying to keep her voice firm. "Montgomery is playing hardball, using the entire institutional apparatus against us." "Maybe it's time to use that USB," Brian suggested. "Leak everything to the press and let public opinion do the work." Felicity hesitated. That had always been her nuclear option, the last resort she preferred not to use. "If we do that, we will completely destroy the university's reputation," she said. "Many innocent people will be harmed. Students will see their degrees devalued. Honest researchers will have their work questioned. But if we don't, Montgomery will crush you," Peter argued, "and continue with the same old practices." At that moment, Eleanor's cell phone rang. She answered and spoke briefly, her expression changing from concern to surprise. "That was Charles Worthington," she announced after hanging up. "He's on his way. He wants to speak with you personally, Felicity." Everyone exchanged glances, surprised. The billionaire philanthropist, the university's main sponsor, coming personally to a simple apartment in a modest neighborhood. 15 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Eleanor went to answer and returned accompanied by Charles Worthington, who entered alone without his usual team of security and assistants. "Miss Reed," he greeted, extending his hand to Felicity. "Thank you for receiving me in your home. You are welcome," she replied, indicating the only vacant chair at the small table. "Although I am surprised by your visit." Worthington sat down, looking around with genuine interest, without the slightest trace of condescension. "I came because the situation has become complicated in a way I didn't anticipate," he said directly. "Dean Montgomery has mobilized considerable resources to discredit you and neutralize your accusations." "We are aware," Anna Louise replied. "Felicity has already been suspended from her job and is being investigated for theft of intellectual property." Worthington nodded gravely. "It's just the beginning. Montgomery has contacts at all levels, from the media to the judiciary. He is willing to do anything to protect his position and the institution's reputation, or at least the version of it that he has built." "Why are you telling us this?" Peter asked, not hiding his suspicion. "You are the university's main financier. Wouldn't your interest be to protect the institution at all costs?" The billionaire smiled slightly. "Professor Ellis, isn't it? I've read some of your articles on ethics in journalism. Very impressive." He turned to the entire group. "My interest is in academic excellence and genuine scientific advancement, not in the perpetuation of a corrupt system that benefits only a privileged few while wasting extraordinary talents like Ms. Reed's." He took a tablet from the briefcase he was carrying and placed it on the table. "Last night I initiated my own discreet investigation. What I discovered is frankly disturbing. Montgomery is not just defending his current position, he is protecting a history of manipulations that spans over a decade." Worthington slid his finger across the screen, showing documents, graphs, and emails. Misappropriation of research funds, systematic manipulation of academic results, secret agreements with companies to direct research in exchange for personal benefits. This goes far beyond what you reported, Ms. Reed. Felicity and the others looked at the documents, astonished by the extent of the corruption revealed. "How did you get this?" Eleanor asked, impressed. Worthington gave an enigmatic smile. "Let's just say I'm not merely a naive donor who signs checks without asking questions. I always keep eyes and ears on institutions I financially support." "Why are you sharing this with us?" Felicity questioned directly. "Because I believe you represent the change that university desperately needs," he replied with surprising sincerity. "Your academic brilliance combined with your direct experience with the system's injustices gives you a unique and valuable perspective." He paused, looking directly at Felicity. "Montgomery has called an extraordinary meeting of the Administrative Council for tomorrow. The objective is to formally disqualify your accusations and approve a resolution that essentially declares you persona non grata at the university." "But didn't you demand my presence at that meeting?" Felicity asked. "Yes, but Montgomery managed to garner enough support to bypass me on that specific point," Worthington admitted. "He argues that your presence would compromise the impartiality of the deliberations. In other words, it's a kangaroo court," Anna Louise concluded, indignant. "They are going to judge you without the right to defense. Worthington nodded. Exactly. Unless we have a strategy to reverse the situation, and you have one in mind, Peter stated, not as a question, but as an observation. The billionaire smiled. Indeed I do. And it involves using Montgomery's own weapons against him. The group drew closer as Worthington began to outline his plan. As he spoke, the faces around the table showed a mixture of surprise, admiration, and renewed hope. Outside the apartment, the sun began to set. The next day promised to be decisive not only for Felicity, but for the future of an institution that had long strayed from its original mission. As the others animatedly discussed the details of the plan, Felicity felt her son stir vigorously in her womb. She placed her hand on her belly and smiled. "Calm down, little one," she thought. "Mommy is fighting for a better world for you." Across the city, in Dean Montgomery's luxurious penthouse apartment, another meeting was taking place. Counselors, lawyers, and press advisors meticulously planned how to discredit Felicity Reed once and for all. "We've gained access to her medical records," one of the advisors informed. "We can insinuate that she has a history of emotional instability." "And the recordings?" asked one of the counselors. "How do we neutralize that risk?" Montgomery smiled confidently. "That's already resolved. Tomorrow the council will declare that any clandestinely obtained recording is inadmissible and possibly illegal. Furthermore," he paused for a sip of whiskey, "I have a few surprises prepared for our ambitious cleaner." What none of them realized was that their meticulously crafted plan was already beginning to crumble at the edges. Facing a force they had consistently underestimated, the unwavering determination of a woman who had nothing to lose and the absolute conviction that she was on the right side of history. The Grand University Council Hall gleamed that morning. Dark wood panels lined the walls, interspersed with portraits of former deans, men with serious expressions who seemed to observe the unusual agitation with disapproval. Around the enormous oval table, counselors, administrators, and tenured professors took their designated seats, many exchanging nervous glances or hurried whispers. At the head of the table, Dean Montgomery displayed a studied confidence. Dressed in an impeccable suit, he conversed animatedly with his closest allies, occasionally glancing at the door, as if expecting an intrusion at any moment. Charles Worthington entered alone, greeting a few acquaintances with discreet nods as he walked to his place of honor, to the dean's right. His face betrayed no emotion, maintaining a diplomatic neutrality that intrigued the most attentive observers. "Charles," Montgomery exclaimed with false joviality, extending his hand, "I fear our little situation has taken up your precious time." "Not at all, Richard," Worthington replied, briefly shaking the offered hand. "Some matters deserve our full attention, no matter how busy we are." The dean forced a smile, noting the subtlety of the response, but before he could reply, the Secretary-General announced the start of the extraordinary session. "Ladies and gentlemen of the Council, today we convene to discuss the serious accusations made against this institution and to deliberate on the appropriate measures to be taken," the Secretary formally declared. Montgomery stood up, adjusting his tie knot. "Before we begin, I would like to establish some parameters." His voice sounded confident, calculated. "The accusations made by former student and employee Felicity Reed are extremely serious and potentially damaging to the reputation of this centuries-old university." He paused, looking around to ensure he had everyone's attention. "After consulting with our legal counsel, we have determined that any clandestinely obtained recording cannot be considered valid evidence, being potentially illegal and inadmissible. Furthermore, we are facing a delicate situation where an employee, possibly motivated by personal grievances, is attempting to extort the university with threats and defamation." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some counselors nodded in approval, while others maintained neutral expressions, cautious not to reveal their positions prematurely. "Therefore," Montgomery continued, "I propose that the Council immediately vote on a resolution declaring the accusations unfounded and authorizing legal measures against Ms. Reed for defamation, invasion of privacy, and attempted extortion." Worthington discreetly raised his hand, requesting to speak. "With all due respect, Dean, wouldn't it be appropriate to hear the specific accusations and evidence before deliberating on their validity?" Montgomery smiled tensely. Naturally, Charles. I have prepared a summary of the allegations for the council, along with detailed refutations of each point. He gestured, and his assistant began distributing folders to those present. In fact, Worthington interjected, I suggest we hear the accusations directly from the source. The Dean frowned. We've already discussed this. Charles, Ms. Reed's presence would be counterproductive and potentially disruptive to this session. Furthermore, the regulations are clear. Only council members and formally approved guests may participate in these meetings. Worthington nodded with a contemplative expression. Correct. And as an honorary member of the council, I formally request the presence of a special guest for this session, a person whose perspective I consider essential for a fair deliberation. Montgomery hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. Denying a formal request from Worthington, the university's biggest benefactor, would be politically disastrous. And who would this special guest be? Dr. Eleanor Campbell, Worthington replied. Professor Emerita of this institution, with over 30 years of dedicated service. I believe her experience and institutional knowledge will be valuable to our discussion. The dean visibly relaxed. Eleanor Campbell, though respected, was just a retired professor. Her presence did not pose the threat that Felicity Reed would bring. Naturally, had he agreed, Dr. Campbell will always be welcome at our institution. Worthington smiled discreetly and signaled to the secretary, who opened the door. Eleanor Campbell entered, leaning on her cane with a thick folder under her arm. What surprised everyone, however, was who accompanied her. A group of reporters, photographers, and cameramen who quickly began to position themselves at the back of the room. What does this mean? Montgomery demanded, standing abruptly. This is a closed meeting. Worthington maintained his characteristic calm. Actually, Richard, I checked the regulations this morning. Article 47, paragraph 2, clearly states that extraordinary council sessions can be open to the press upon request of any council member, provided the topic is of relevant public interest. He smiled gently. I sent the formal request to the Secretariat last night. I have confirmation of receipt if necessary. The dean's face visibly paled. This is an ambush, he murmured, low enough for only Worthington to hear. This is transparency, the billionaire corrected. Something this university seems to have forgotten in recent years. Eleanor Campbell took her seat in a chair specially arranged for her. The reporters, now properly installed, observed the scene with evident interest. This was not an ordinary administrative meeting. It was potentially the biggest educational scandal of the year. Montgomery, realizing he had lost control of the situation, tried at least to save face. Welcome, Dr. Campbell. We are honored by your presence. He turned to the press with a forced smile. And naturally, we appreciate the media's interest in our deliberations. The Commonwealth University of New Haven has always valued transparency. Eleanor Campbell adjusted her glasses and spoke with the authority that 3 decades of teaching conferred upon her. Thank you. Dean, before we begin, I would like to hand over to the Council some documents that I consider relevant to this discussion. She opened her folder and took out several sets of documents, which were distributed by the secretary to each council member. What is this? Montgomery questioned, quickly flipping through the pages in front of him, his face progressively paling. These are official records, Eleanor replied calmly. Meeting minutes, internal memos, institutional emails, financial records, all obtained through official channels, via formal requests based on the Freedom of Information Act. She paused significantly, looking directly at the dean. Interestingly, when these official documents are analyzed together, they precisely corroborate the allegations made by Felicity Reed. The difference is that these were obtained in an absolutely legal and irrefutable manner. The silence that fell over the room was almost palpable. Councillors flipped through the documents with expressions ranging from shock to indignation. Camera flashes captured the historic moment unfolding. Montgomery seemed stunned. This is a distortion. These documents are out of context. We need time to analyze them properly before any deliberation. For me, we can take all the time necessary, Worthington agreed. In the meantime, perhaps it would be interesting to hear the perspective of someone who experienced the direct consequences of the discriminatory policies these documents evidence. He looked at the door, which opened once more. Felicity Reed entered, no longer in her cleaning uniform but formally dressed, in a simple yet elegant dress that accommodated her advanced pregnancy. Beside her walked Anna Louise, Brian, and Peter, all equally well-dressed and carrying folders. "This is unacceptable," Montgomery protested, standing up. "She was not formally invited." "Actually," Eleanor interjected, "as an official guest, I have the right to bring technical advisors to assist in my presentation. Article 53 of the regulations is quite clear on this." The dean looked desperately at the other council members, seeking support, but found only serious or openly hostile faces. The tide had definitively turned against him. Felicity approached the table, maintaining an impressive dignity in the face of the fixed gazes upon her. "Members of the council, I thank you for the opportunity to speak." Her voice was clear and firm. "I'm not here for personal revenge. I am here because I believe in the transformative potential of this university, and because I know it can and should be better than it has been." She gestured to Brian, who began distributing another set of documents. "What you are now receiving are signed testimonies from dozens of students, professors and staff members who have been victims or witnesses of discrimination, harassment, or administrative irregularities over the past 5 years. All have agreed to testify formally if necessary." Felicity took a deep breath, one hand instinctively resting on her belly. "I have also included a detailed proposal for structural reforms in scholarship policy, faculty, hiring, and support for students in vulnerable situations. I'm not just asking for reparations for myself, but for a systemic transformation that benefits the entire academic community." Photographers frantically captured the moment. The pregnant woman, standing before the university council, confronting the powerful dean who now seemed strangely diminished in his chair. A councilwoman, a professor of constitutional law, stood up. "These documents are extremely concerning. They suggest not only systemic discrimination, but possible crimes of administrative impropriety and misappropriation of public funds." She looked directly at Montgomery. "As a member of this council, I cannot ignore such compelling evidence." Other councillors began to speak up, many clearly shocked by what they had read. The balance of power in the room had dramatically shifted in a matter of minutes. Montgomery, realizing he was losing control of the situation, made one last desperate attempt. "Ladies and gentlemen, I ask for calm. These are serious accusations that require proper investigation. I suggest we form an independent commission to analyze all these documents before making any hasty decisions that could irremediably harm our institution." Charles Worthington intervened, his calm voice contrasting with the growing agitation in the room. "I agree that a full investigation is necessary. However, while that investigation proceeds, I suggest some immediate measures. The reinstatement of Ms. Reed as a student, with revalidation of her academic credits, the provisional implementation of the scholarship fund for students in vulnerable situations, and, naturally, the temporary removal of the current administration to ensure that the investigation can proceed without interference." Montgomery's face contorted in a mixture of anger and despair. "This is a coup, a conspiracy to remove me and take control of the university." "No, Richard," Worthington replied calmly. "It is the natural consequence of years of administration that prioritized appearances over substance, privilege over true merit, and power over educational purpose." The professor of constitutional law spoke again. "I propose we vote on Mr. Worthington's suggestions. Those in favor, please raise your hand." One by one, hands went up around the table. Not all. Some councillors more loyal to Montgomery or fearful of the consequences abstained. But a clear majority voted in favor. Montgomery, seeing his empire crumble before his eyes, stood up abruptly. "You will regret this. All of you!" He glared furiously at Felicity. "Especially you." And with those words he stormed out of the room, leaving behind a momentary silence that was soon replaced by the buzz of excited voices and the constant clicking of cameras. Felicity felt a wave of relief mixed with deep exhaustion. Eleanor approached and held her hands. "You did it, my dear. Against all odds." "No, Professor," Felicity corrected, looking around at her allies. "We did it. And this is just the beginning." Charles Worthington approached the group. "Ms. Reed is right. Today we took the first step to rebuild this institution on fairer foundations. He extended his hand to Felicity. It will be an honor to work with you in this reconstruction process. As she shook the billionaire's hand, Felicity felt a sudden contraction that made her wince slightly. Anna Louise noticed immediately. "Felicity, are you all right?" "Just a contraction," she replied, trying to smile. "Nothing to worry about." But soon another contraction, stronger, made her lean on the table. Eleanor and Anna Louise rushed to support her. "We need to get her to the hospital," Eleanor said urgently. "These contractions seem to be regular." Felicity nodded, suddenly worried. It was still too early for the baby to be born. "Please," she whispered, as she was helped out of the room under the continuous flashes of cameras and the worried glances of the council. "Please, not now." As she was rushed to the university hospital, Felicity couldn't help but notice the irony. Her son seemed determined to be born in the very institution that had almost destroyed his mother's dream, on the very day she began to transform it into a better place. 6 months had passed since that tumultuous afternoon in the council hall. The campus of the Commonwealth University of New Haven gleamed under the spring sun. Students walked through the well-maintained gardens, some alone, engrossed in reading, others in animated groups discussing projects and ideas. The atmosphere was visibly different, lighter, more vibrant, as if the institution itself breathed a sigh of relief after shedding an oppressive weight. In the former dean's office, now transformed into a collective administrative space, Felicity Reed typed quickly on her laptop, finalizing the proposal for expanding the scholarship program for student mothers. Beside her, in an improvised crib, Michael, her 5-month-old son, slept peacefully. The premature birth had been frightening, but mother and son had overcome the complications and were now thriving. A gentle knock on the door interrupted her concentration. "Come in," Felicity called, saving the document. Eleanor Campbell entered, accompanied by Charles Worthington. The retired professor seemed more energetic than ever, as if the recent events had renewed her enthusiasm for academic life. "Good morning, Professor Reed," Eleanor greeted with a smile. "Or should I say, Director of the Inclusive Research Center?" Felicity smiled, still not completely accustomed to the new title. "Please, just Felicity." "Especially for you two." Worthington approached the crib, observing the sleeping baby with tenderness. "He's getting bigger every day," he commented. "And you seem to be adapting well to the new routine." Felicity nodded, looking lovingly at her son. "The Child Development Center has been a blessing. I can work knowing that Michael is well cared for right here on campus, and I can visit him whenever necessary." "One of the best innovations we've implemented," Eleanor agreed. "We already have 15 student mothers and 10 female professors regularly using the service. The waiting list for next semester is already full." Worthington sat down, placing a folder on the table. "I bring good news. The Department of Education has approved the Scholarship Program Expansion Project. Starting next semester, we will have 100 more places for low-income students, with priority for single mothers and students from Indigenous and Quilombola communities." Felicity couldn't contain a smile of satisfaction. "That's wonderful. With the supplement from the Worthington Foundation, we will also be able to cover housing assistance and full meal plans." "And that's not all," Eleanor added, sitting next to Worthington. "The University Council unanimously approved the creation of the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies in Public Health under your direction, Felicity. You will have the autonomy to develop that early diagnosis research that was interrupted years ago." Felicity felt her eyes well up. After so many years of struggle and sacrifice, seeing her dreams not only restored but expanded to benefit so many other people was almost surreal. "I don't even know how to thank you." "Without you?" Worthington raised his hand, gently interrupting her. "Don't thank us. You achieved this through your own merit and courage. We merely removed the unjust obstacles that were placed in your path." Another knock on the door announced the arrival of Brian, now Felicity's research assistant and coordinator of the mentoring program for low-income students. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, visibly excited, "but I thought you'd want to know. The disciplinary committee has just published the final report on the Montgomery case. The former dean had left the university in disgrace after the council meeting, but a full investigation into his administration was still ongoing. And Eleanor asked, adjusting her glasses. Guilty on all counts, Brian replied. Misappropriation of funds, academic fraud, persecution of professors and students, manipulation of research results. The list is extensive. He is permanently banned from the public university system and will face criminal charges for several of the offences. A silent satisfaction swept through the room. It was not a matter of personal revenge, but of justice finally being served. And what's most impressive, Brian continued, consulting his notes, is that more than 30 other people harmed by him during his administration are being reinstated or compensated. Professors unjustly dismissed, researchers whose projects were shelved for political reasons, students who lost scholarships due to discrimination. It's a true institutional reconstruction. Michael chose that moment to wake up, announcing himself with a small cry. Felicity stood up to pick him up, cuddling him against her chest. I think he's celebrating too, she joked, as the baby calmed in her arms. The door opened again, and Anna Louise entered hurriedly. Sorry, I'm late, she said, placing a pile of documents on the table. The judge has just approved the collective agreement. All outsourced employees will gradually be incorporated into the university's permanent staff, with the same rights and benefits as other civil servants. That was one of the toughest battles they had faced in recent months, ending the outsourcing system that created second-class workers within the university. George, Felicity's former supervisor, had been instrumental in mobilizing employees for this fight. Does that mean George? Felicity began. He will be the new Director of General Services, with a permanent seat on the Institutional Policy Committee, Anna Louise confirmed, smiling. He almost cried when he received the news. Felicity gently swayed Michael, who now observed those present with curious eyes. You know, sometimes I still find it hard to believe how quickly everything changed, she confessed. A year ago I was cleaning these very corridors, invisible to most people. Today you are the symbol of this university's transformation, Eleanor completed. And an example for institutions across the country. Worthington stood up, approaching the window that offered a panoramic view of the campus. The changes here are already inspiring reforms at other universities. I received calls from deans of 3 different institutions this week, all wanting to know more about our new inclusion and administrative transparency programs. Michael made a small sound, as if wanting to participate in the conversation, drawing smiles from everyone. The real change, Anna Louise observed, is that we are creating a new generation that will grow up seeing inclusion as the norm, not the exception. These students of today will be the professors, researchers and administrators of tomorrow. Brian looked at his watch. Speaking of which, it's almost time for your lecture to the freshmen, Felicity. The auditorium must already be packed. Felicity nodded, picking up a small bag where she kept Michael's essentials. Do you mind if I bring this little guy with me? She asked, stroking her son's head. I think it's important for new students to see that motherhood and academic life are not mutually exclusive. That's the best idea I've ever heard, Eleanor approved. What a more powerful message for freshmen to see the director of the research center, with her baby in her arms, speaking about the future of inclusive education. The group left the office, walking through the corridors now familiar to Felicity in a completely different way. Students and professors greeted her respectfully. Some cleaning staff smiled with special pride. Felicity had become a symbol of hope for all of them. As they approached the auditorium, they could see the crowd gathering. Not just freshmen, but veterans, professors, and even people from the external community had come to hear the woman who had transformed the university. At the auditorium entrance, Felicity stopped, surprised. A new plaque had been installed, still covered by a cloth. What is this? She asked, turning to her companions. Eleanor, Worthington, Brian, and Anna Louise exchanged knowing glances. A little surprise, Eleanor replied. We decided it would be appropriate to do this today, at the official opening of the academic year. With a solemn gesture, Eleanor pulled away the cloth, revealing an elegant bronze plaque, Clara Reed Inclusive Research Center. True excellence does not exclude. It includes, transforms, and elevates. Felicity felt tears well up uncontrollable. Her mother, the domestic helper who had sacrificed everything so her daughter could study, now had her name immortalized in the very institution that had almost destroyed Felicity's dream. "She would be so proud of you," Eleanor said softly. Unable to speak, Felicity merely nodded, hugging Michael a little tighter. The baby, as if understanding the emotion of the moment, remained exceptionally quiet, looking with curiosity at the shining plaque. "I think we have an auditorium waiting for you," Worthington reminded gently, after giving Felicity a few moments to compose herself. Taking a deep breath, she nodded, wiping away her tears. "Yes, let's go. We have a lot of work ahead of us." As they walked towards the auditorium, Felicity spotted a cleaning employee working discreetly in a corner. The woman, appearing to be around 40 years old, looked up and met Felicity's gaze. For a brief moment something passed between them, a recognition, a connection, a shared understanding. Felicity smiled at her and received a shy smile in return. She made a mental note to get to know that woman later, to learn her story, to understand her dreams. Because if she had learned anything on her journey, it was that every person had value, every story mattered, and no one deserved to be invisible. Upon entering the packed auditorium, Felicity Reed was met with a standing ovation. With Michael firmly nestled in one arm and her notes in her free hand, she walked to the podium, the same podium from which, months ago, Dean Montgomery had tried to humiliate her. Looking at the diverse audience, students of all backgrounds, professors of all ages, staff from all sectors, Felicity felt a wave of gratitude and responsibility. "Welcome to the Commonwealth University of New Haven," she began. "An institution that is learning every day. That true academic excellence only exists when we open our doors to all talents, regardless of where they come from." The words flowed naturally now. As she shared her vision of a truly inclusive education, Michael observed everything with curious eyes, as if already absorbing lessons he would one day use to continue his mother's work. Outside, the sun shone over the transformed campus. In the gardens, new benches displayed discreet plaques. "Nursing area." At the entrances of the buildings, new ramps ensured universal access. In the newly renovated library, an entire section was dedicated to studies on equality and social inclusion. Small changes that, together, represented a silent revolution. A revolution initiated by a woman who refused to accept that her worth could be determined by others, that her capacity could be limited by prejudices, that her future could be stolen by an unjust system. And as Felicity Reed spoke, inspiring hundreds of young minds to dream and fight for a better world, her son smiled as if he already knew. True power was never in titles or positions, but in the courage of an ordinary person who decides to raise their voice when everyone expects them to remain silent. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Felicity Reed's story has touched your hearts and inspired your minds. To follow more equally emotional and transformative narratives, we have prepared a special playlist with stories of overcoming adversity and justice that will surely captivate you. Find it by clicking the link to your left. If this journey of courage and determination resonated with you, be sure to subscribe to our channel and show your support by leaving a like on this video. Every day, we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life, the challenges we face, and the extraordinary human capacity to transform adversity into triumph. We look forward to reading your comments on how Felicity's story inspired you. What other brave women do you know who, like her, changed the world around them with their persistence and intelligence? Share with us, and let's celebrate these inspiring examples together.